I think he was looking at it because he's, as a strategist and as a sort of advisor to the chief of the general staff, he was looking for like-minded people to sort of go with him on a journey.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Think.Fight.Learn.Repeat, the show where experience meets insight. I'm your host, Lex Luciak. In part one of a two-part discussion, I'll be sitting down with Ed Farren, the co-founder of Fight Club International. Now, Fight Club is a global network of defense professionals, analysts, and strategic thinkers dedicated to improving how we think about conflict, competition, and decision-making through wargaming. In today's conversation, we'll talk about the origins of Fight Club International, why wargaming and critical debate matters more than ever, and how organizations like this help professionals prepare for the complex challenges of modern conflict. Now, as always, the views and opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of our guest and do not reflect the views of any government entity, private enterprise, or individuals outside the scope of this interview. Now let's get to business with Ed. All right, Ed, welcome to the inaugural episode of Think, Fight, Learn. Now, to start us off, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you first got into wargaming?
Hey Lex, thanks for having me on, and most importantly, thank you for taking the bull by the horns and leading with this podcast series. Yeah, so it's been we're going to have to go a long journey back into the mist of time here to get to the start. And I don't want that to put everyone off, but like a lot of things, it started in childhood when I became interested in miniature wargaming. And none of this was going on in my family, and I was very much the outlier in this space. But back in the 1990s, as it was, that would have been the go-to thing for wargaming. It was largely miniature figures, Napoleonics, American Civil War, World War II, World War One kind of thing. And there were hobby wargame clubs. There probably still are, although they probably have reduced in number. And I got interested into it because I was into the history. So I was an avid history and military history reader, and this was a way to play out and experience normally the battles, the tactical level, in a way which school and just reading about it was not doing. And back then, you had to basically buy the miniatures, prime them with a base layer of paint, and then spend an inordinate amount of time painting them. And the larger the scale, the easier they are to paint, but the fewer miniatures you have, and therefore the more you have to do. And the smaller ones are, very difficult and finicky. So inevitably, you end up with most of your army not painted or armies not painted, and it's a sin to try and play with them when they're not painted. So it's an odd hobby in that sense that it's got a natural breaking mechanism on it. I did get to see a couple of board games that we would now call sort of board war games, but they were incredibly complex at the time, or they were really super simple, casual family gaming, and I didn't really find anywhere in the middle. And I think that's why now, 25 years later, sort of as a game designer, I'm really keen to try and produce games that are both professionally satisfying and also are playable, as opposed to so complex and so massive that they require days to do, and you need to have already been an expert wargamer for weeks. So that's how I gone.
That's really interesting. Just looking back at your childhood and seeing that it's not necessarily the figures themselves or the miniatures themselves that drew you into wargaming, but using them as a tool to reenact history was the primary focus, and then that kind of drew you towards the miniatures and then into the hex and counter wargaming side.
Yeah, and when you're in a group doing it, it's sort of by its nature. I said there was a limiting break factor on it. You probably have a couple of armies. You go to a group, a club, hobby, and there's each person has a couple of armies. So you kind of have to get together to share their love, so to speak. And everyone who you talk to will know a lot about their army, and a little bit about everyone else's. So there's a great community aspect of shared historical exploration, and then differences of opinion on battles and tactics and so on and so forth. Which, yeah, this is the 90s, so that we didn't have instant communication with everyone. We didn't have Discord and all that sort of stuff. So for me, that was the other pillar. which I think as we get into the subsequent discussion, Fight Club International is also very firmly wedded to the idea of bringing people together with this shared overlap of interest in subject area and immersive gameplay and building each other up in that sense. So this was a small microcosm, but I also accept that on the surface it would probably look quite exclusive because they were generally all men, they were generally all in their 40s, and they were pretty much all white. And so from that perspective, it probably didn't look welcoming on the outside. When you're inside, I don't think there's anything in that would have been exclusionary at all about it. And the only thing they would exclude you for is rule breaking or damaging someone's miniatures. But that is probably an image which has persisted for decades and may continue to cloud people's access into the gaming community even today.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Like in terms of stereotypes within the wargaming community, I mean, I've only really gotten into wargaming probably in the last 7 or 8 years, and I know that in terms of what in my mind, what I thought a wargamer was, or the concept of wargaming, and I hit all those exact same stereotypes in my mind as you just listed there. So you spoke a little bit about Fight Club. You're obviously rocking the Fight Club apparel, right? Repping the brand. So let's just get right into it. We'll shift gears here, and I guess my next question is, what led you to start Fight Club International? And was there like a particular moment or need in the community that pushed you to create it? Like, what was that inspiration that was like, all right, I'm going to start this?
Well, I'm afraid I can't take full credit because the founding father was Colonel Arnel David, a US Army exchange officer in the British Army headquarters in Andover, who just before COVID kicked off, so the timing couldn't have been better, put up a flyer, a poster in the men's bathrooms, looking for effectively disruptors to challenge orthodox thinking through gaming. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what I've been waiting for all my life to sort of come up professionally. Because up until that point, it had been a struggle to apply wargaming professionally um, versus doing it in the hobby space. I think he was looking at it because he's, as a strategist and as a sort of advisor to the chief of the general staff, he was looking for like-minded people to sort of go with him on a journey, and he thought that was the best way to do it. And I think that seed corn has really stayed with me, with us as the sort of co-directors of Fight Club International, because we do want people to challenge traditional thinking and and to sort of challenge their own limitations and perceptions and do that in a way where they can discover through immersive gaming something on the other side, whether that's about themselves or whether that's about a situation or about tactics, technology, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's a bit loosey-goosey, so I'll try and hone it in on a bit more tangible aspect. But it's a well-known sort of thing of wargamers that I probably know six wargamers, you know six wargamers. So Fight Club International really was about connecting the dots of these small puddles into a lake and maybe even a great sea eventually. Where if we connected all of these war games together through the medium of modern information technology, what could we get up to? What would be our combined and compounded power versus a hobby gaming group that just meets on a Sunday and plays one of the board games on the rack? And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just, I think it's a come of age story whereby the will has probably always been there, but now the technology has enabled people to get together and start sharing stories and sharing notes, which is something that people haven't been able to do before. And the cost of entry is now lower than it's ever been before.
So, if I'm reading you correctly here, it started as a grassroots movement where yourself and uh, Arnell were working, and it was just he recognized a need. They were looking to innovate. Um, you knew a few wargamers. He, of course, knows a few wargamers. So I guess my next question would be, in terms of the original vision, and I think you're already kind of going down that path there. But like, what was your initial like, or yourself and Arnell, or if it was just Arnell, what was the original vision for the organization, and how has that vision changed through the years to like how you both see the organization now?
Yeah, it's an evolving beast, and I sort of half dread this question because someone always says like, "What is Fight Club?" And it's like, well, there's a long answer and a short answer. So I think the short answer first is we basically want more people doing more gaming of a higher quality for better outcomes. And that's quite simplistic. And then, the next question is like, well, how are you going to do any of that? And I think it's if you access any one of those layers, you could misunderstand the overall sum of the parts, which Fight Club International is getting at. So you will look around and find someone who's taking their first foray into wargaming and doing a very simple, basic analog game. And you could look at that and say, well, that's not moving the needle. Or you could look at someone whose day job is doing analytical wargaming anyway, and they happen to be a member of Fight Club and say, that's not moving the needle. But it's the compound effect of having 2,500 members and growing who are sharing ideas on methodologies, application, techniques, especially in the use of large language models and mixing digital and analog gaming in a hybrid way with the people involved in the war game, which we often forget too often, to rapidly come up with something that is useful faster than the traditional methodology often allows, which is normally 6 months to a year to get put a war game together. And the sort of the next bit is what do you point that at? And I think that's not for us to say as the sort of civilian non-attributable network, but we want to provide people the opportunity to get started in this industry and also for organizations to lean in and use us and our people to get ahead of the discovery curve or whatever it is they're trying to do. And really, you can't define it until you actually have the problem space.
So initially, you described the initial stereotypes that you saw in your experience when you first got into wargaming. You've started delving into a bit of what the Fight Club community does and some of the ongoing activities or topics within the community. In your mind, looking back at when you first linked in with Arnell, or even looking back at your childhood and your experiences with wargaming, and then looking at where we're at now, in your mind, like who do you think that Fight Club is for?
Well, I'm going to say everyone naturally. I mean, we do not want the entire world to be in Fight Club International. It's not like Amazon wanting to market penetrate the entire human race. We accept that wargaming will probably still be quite a niche topic and tool, but we are absolutely not trying to target one small sector of the community. I'd say the only thing we're trying to exclude are the people on the other side of the Western liberal democratic order, because we don't want them to benefit from the methods and techniques that we're using. But other than that, we're pretty much a broad church and very open to anyone's entry and contribution. And I think the danger is that people assume that you need to be in the military, and I accept that having both directors as serving military officers, it will probably add to that perception. But you do not need to be in the military to be in Fight Club. You do not need to have been a wargamer for 20 years. A grognard would be the term that often comes up. You do not need to work in the defense industry or work in academia teaching war studies or military history. And you do not need to be working in a data analytical startup or anything like that. We're not so much interested in that background. We're more interested in the contribution of your mind that you can bring to the group. And that diversity of membership is a strength that I think maybe traditional wargaming organizations, or organizations that wargame, I should say, might be lacking, because they are continuing to pull from the same demographic, which is usually a retired senior officer.
Yeah, and I mean, just going back to my own experiences with the organization, I would argue that in terms of unique frames of references or perspectives that provide substantial value to Fight Club right now, I would argue is the folks that are actually outside of the military community, because they bring in that angle that uh, a lot of folks in uniform don't necessarily consider. It doesn't fall within that PMESI PT structure or dot mil PF or whatever you want to call it. And we've seen some absolutely fantastic products, fantastic initiatives from those folks. Definitely some of the hardest working folks in the Fight Club community.
Yeah, and
Um,
I see it with game design where often a military person will initially design a game which follows the very rigid doctrine that they've been taught, and a civilian enthusiast will probably be a bit more open-ended, more sandbox, and also in game execution where we as infantry types would probably be trying to do a third of my force is going to provide suppressive fire, a third of my force will move to assault, and a third will be reserve. And then a civilian enthusiast will be doing something completely different, possibly more effective, because they're not bound mentally by the anchor of doctrine. And that's not to say the doctrine is wrong. It's just saying that that perspective is refreshing because in a room of 10 of you and me, we're all going to quote that, or nine of us are going to quote that, and the 10th person is going to do something different. We're going to pile on and destroy because, we don't want to look bad. And I think that a small example, if you amplify that through game design and gameplay, you can see we're going to move away from a very tired rehashing of the doctrine book in an analog war game or a digital war game to actually exploring like how can we solve this problem faster with less blood or less use of resource, whatever that happens to be. And I think that's something that Fight Club International really encourages because you don't get the classic put down of like, well, what the hell do you know, big nose, because I've been in the army for 20 years and you haven't been in for 2 minutes. And I think the professional leveler of gaming being the sort of field on which we play and we don't all rest on our professional laurels is really refreshing. And that is something also that I think more established wargaming institutions can have a problem with, whereby new people don't want to get in and game with people who have been in the military for 20 years because they feel their opinion is just worthless.
yeah, and we both know that's absolutely not the case. That's usually the opinion or the perspective that we absolutely need in order to uh, inject a bit of creativity into what we do. So, yeah, you spoke a little bit about folks that have joined the organization, your journey with Fight Club. So I'll just want to hone in a little bit more on that and just looking back from when it started to where we're at now. What are some of the moments or milestones that really stand out for you in Fight Club's journey?
Oh, yeah, I think we've done 5 years now, which is depressing in the sense that I didn't feel like it's been 5 years. But yeah, time flies when you're having fun, or when you're running a wargaming startup, I guess. Well, as I said, it was just before COVID when this whole thing sort of kicked off, and then we went into the pandemic and lockdowns and stuff. So there was a real surge of people with time in their hands and digital communication systems to put it together. So quite quickly, we were throwing together gaming via a digital war game system, and we started off pretty much with Combat Mission, which is a game from Matrix Games, a tactical platoon to battalion level simulator from World War II to modern times. Um, that was more of just get something going. Because again, the frustration sometimes is that people want to spend a year discussing what we should be doing rather than just getting on with something and then iterating off that. And if something's happening, you draw people in. If nothing's happening and it's a talking shop, it feels a lot like work and it kind of drives people away. So getting into that was good, and running a couple of campaigns of learning and recording our first video with our massively long COVID hair, which I I hope one day will be scrubbed from the internet history. Was a sort of milestone. We actually got to sort of meet and brief the then chief of the general staff on Fight Club, which was a significant milestone given everything that was going on in the country at the time. A real credit to Arnell for sort of getting his foot in the door for that. The running the first fight night, how to do a fight night webinar, which is available on our website, and for me it was a great milestone because it was junior officers presenting on how to do a fight night to other junior officers effectively. And when I say junior officers, it could equally mean non-commissioned officers. And that for me again touches one of the sort of things that I'm really passionate about is the motto of teach a person to fish, not give a person a fish. Far too much wargaming is about delivering a single wargame session to an audience and probably cashing in on that rather than getting them to the level where they can run it themselves and then iterate off that. So for me, that was a great milestone, and because it proves that if they can do it, then anyone can do it. And I think trying to break down that perception of elitism, of the sort of great wargamer theory that you're either born with it or you're not, which I think is just absolute bullshit. But you continue to hear some people who believe they were born with it say that because it protects their interest in enterprise. Another milestone I'd say is when we got the first physical copy of the Primer War game that we sell and have given out many for free. Take That Hill, which is originally a design by Phil Sabin, which we then built upon, created an advanced layer, and that's again a significant milestone because giving someone a physical game that they can take home and play with others is again a tactile and haptic thing that humans can lock onto rather than another app. Whilst I fully support digital gaming and digital gaming apps, it's just nice to have something, a gizzit, as we would say in the UK, to take away with. And we've done since subsequent runs of that and had it actually sponsored by Vedette Consulting, a professional consulting firm, which shows that it's being taken seriously. We do have it on Amazon. It's currently out of stock, but we'll be getting more in soon. And we're also in conversations with a company to digitize it so it can be accessible via mobile and browser as well. Another milestone would be when we held a gaming concentration at the Improbable Studios in London. And we did 3 different games and discussions around gaming. And again, for me, I've already mentioned it, harking back to the idea of community and networking. And I don't just mean networking in the sort of sense of like in the city, every time you go for a boozy lunch, it's networking. I mean genuinely meeting people who share the passion for gaming and can add value to what you're trying to do, and you can add value to what they're trying to do, and you then stay in touch afterwards and build upon what each other wants to do. So not a transactional exchange, a win-win, thinking win-win, which is often, I think, where the wargame community can get ahead of other communities because we're not really in direct competition with each other. Or we certainly shouldn't think of it that way.
Yeah, I when you're talking about the tactical excellence piece there, a couple of milestones back, he definitely made me think of my own experience of joining Fight Club. And at the time, I was I thought I was at my tactical peak in terms of operating and commanding, whether it be a sub unit or a subunit. And lo and behold, I think it was one of the first wargaming events that we did. I got absolutely mopped up by a 18, 19-year-old kid that's never served a day in their life in the military, and it definitely, and it was under terms where yeah, like that could have happened exactly like that on the map or on the terrain or in reality. And it definitely made me do some introspective thinking and realize like you have to put in those sets and reps if you're first and foremost if you're a military professional. And it's not intuitive. You don't just wake up one day and you're Napoleon Bonaparte or you're Wellington. It takes hours and hours and hours and days and years of practice, and you got to put those reps in.
And that
Uh,
humility that you showed there by at first admitting that story and also admitting that you had something to learn from it is so rare in the military profession. I think we're all, you know, I hate using the phrase imposter syndrome because I think it's overused by people who are just less competent than they should be. But I think so many officers are sort of terrified of being found out about what they don't know, as if it's some sort of cardinal sin to not know everything about, tactics in your particular field. Which is, I mean, have you seen the size of the doctrine books for it lately? You can't read that, and understand it in a lifetime. Which is why applying it through gaming is so beneficial. And of course, my understanding and your understanding can be two very different things, and that's why playing together we can learn from each other in a positive sense, and then we have the competitive spirit aspects, which you don't get when you're just reading the doctrine or applying the tactics on a whiteboard. And you're right to point out that you probably felt a bit chagrined by being you probably felt chagrined by being beaten by someone who hadn't been in the military, and then an instant dismissal comment that I've heard many times is like, "Oh, well, the game must be shit because the individual who isn't in the military beat the person who's in the military." When if you boil it down to principles, is often the best way to look at it. I mean, I had a similar experience. If we're telling stories where I was beaten effectively by a reservist officer playing an insurgent force defending an urban area. I was doing textbook blue infantry tactics, that would have got me, probably high praise on any course. But they were doing very good counter tactics because they knew I was going to do, very templated blue tactics because they'd also done the course. And if we were competing on a course to do templated blue tactics, I would be top student and they would be bottom student. But we weren't. We were competing in the crucible of actual combat, and the answer was who could adapt fastest, and he was adapting faster than I was to him. And I think that's a lesson that I wouldn't necessarily have learnt just going through the standard professional military education and the career courses.
yeah, you're definitely right there. The comment or quote that comes to mind, and I know you've had him on here as doing a webinar, is Chuck Oliviero's quote there from Praxis Tacticum: "The enemy is the objective." And if the enemy knows what you're going to do, or if you know what the enemy is going to do, well, then you have that competitive advantage of being able to understand the second and third order effects of what your actions are, and then what they plan to do based on that. That wraps up this episode of Think, Fight, Learn, Repeat, the show where experience meets insight. A huge thank you to our guest for taking the time to share their perspective, and to you, the audience, for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. Think, Fight, Learn, Repeat is proud to be part of the Fight Club Network. You can learn more and find additional content at www.fightclubinternational.org. Until next time, thank you.